Hi everybody, my name is LaCasse and I'd like to first thank you all for coming to see my senior exhibition. So here I am to start. I'm at a coffee farm in Costa Rica and I'm working, and you might be wondering, what am I doing? What am I working on? And ultimately I'm working trying to answer my essential question, which is how would working with coffee change my perspective on it? So at the beginning of this project, I thought I was going to focus on making a lot of drinks and focusing on the cool latte art and all that. Then I thought, hey, why can't I do roasting? That's pretty cool stuff. Then I thought, no, why can't I work on a coffee farm? But then I sort of thought, why can't I do all of this? I wanted to learn about coffee from the plant to the cup, and that is what I did. In order to do this, one must start at the farm. And I was talking about this one day in my advisory. My advisor is Dan Stillman. And I was talking with Dan. I'm like, hey, maybe I could go work at a coffee farm in Rwanda, or maybe the DR. They have a coffee industry there, and et cetera, et cetera. But then Dan made me known of this fellow. Meet Matthias Zeledon. He is a fourth-generation coffee farmer from Costa Rica, and Dan knew this guy. And actually, a number of teachers know this guy also. So it was kind of wild. Within 4 months of learning about him, I then was able to sit down with him and talk about his industry and work at his farm. So Matthias has a very unique product because his coffee comes from a region called Terazu. And Providencia Terazu Dota is specifically where his coffee comes from. And to give an example, the Providencia is it's 3 hours south of San Jose, which is here. Is this showing up okay? Okay, awesome. So it's right in the Talamanca Mountains. And his farm is about 1,700 to 2,000 meters above sea level. Whoops, I don't want that there. Which means that he is able to get some very unique beans, a type of bean called the SHB, strictly hard bean. These are smaller beans, and they're known for packing a punch, flavor-wise, we'll say. And to put it in perspective of 100% SHB and how hard that is to happen, the average cup of coffee has 10% SHB normally. So for somebody to have 100% is pretty incredible. So another thing that makes his product unique is it's entirely organic. For instance, when drying the coffee cherries after being picked, they are let out to dry in the sun. They're not artificially dried. And also another thing that makes him unique is his nursery. This is old school for coffee farmers, and it's really gives it a different perspective, because with Matthias, and I worked with his nursery a little bit as well, you get to see the plants. This is, in 5 years, going to be a coffee plant that's going to bear fruit, and it's just like 2 inches tall. So he gets to see it in its minuscule nature as it progresses slowly into this, and someday into a tree that'll be 8 feet tall and bearing fruit. With fruit comes infestation, unfortunately. And broca. I spent a lot of my time working and pruning his farmette in La Fortuna because, unfortunately, climate change is a thing, and it affected my plans. I was originally going to go work in the harvest at his farm in Dota Terazu, but the harvest ended a month early. So kind of needed to do something. So I pruned his farmette in La Fortuna. And broca is coffee borer beetle. And these can raise havoc on the plant. So here you can see the coffee plant, and the broca will enter through the navel, which is entering through the navel, right through the pulp, And they will go in and they will basically have babies and dehydrate the bean, therefore making it impossible to form any bean, making the cherry, taking away any nutrients for the cherry to grow, no mucilage, really impossible to have any growth become of this when the broca is in there. And these spread crazy. 3 generations or more can fit into one bean. So imagine a whole farm that's acres and acres of these. And to give you perspective, this cherry right here, this is what the coffee cherry looks like before it's dried and processed for the seed. This is what it looks like when the broca have been in there. And broca have not just raised havoc in Costa Rica, but they're originally African, and they came to to North, South, and Central America during the 1920s first. They made landfall in Brazil, and they've spread up to Hawaii as recently as 2010, and as recently as 2015 they were found in Puerto Rico as well. So these can raise havoc on an industry. Me and Matthias also got to talk about the economics of coffee, and I asked him about fair trade, because we associate that with something, an organization that is good in principle for doing what is right for workers and for the agriculture. Yeah, it is good in principle. However, like, they want to maintain fair trade practices, and they have these statutes. These are their main principles, but they are impossible to enforce because that is not the nature of them. And unfortunately, throughout history, there has been exploitive practices in coffee. To give some context, according to the coffee writer Mark Pendergrast, so Brazil imported 12 times as many slaves as the Americans did, almost entirely in the name of coffee. And still to this day, I was reading about in Guatemala, there is still like a debtors arrangement where people get paid minuscule, if anything, and have to work. So there's still exploitation. But unfortunately, fair trade is not great at enforcing this. Another case can be with the farmer when they sell it. So a farmer sells a 125-pound bag to a mill for $150. Then that mill could sell it for $250, and $3, and $4, and $5, and $6, and et cetera, until it gets to the roaster. So Matthias informed me of a type of trade called direct trade. And this is more advantageous for all parties. It cuts out any middleman, hence direct trade, and makes more money for the farmer and the roaster, forms a bond between them. So I learned about this, and I needed to meet a roaster. So I started the roasting portion of my project, and I'd like you to meet Cristobal. Cristobal roasts here in Bar Harbor. Anybody been to Chocolate, the new coffee matter? Then you've tasted his beans. They are really good. And I was honored to be able to learn about how he does it. And he taught me a lot about the nuances, how when you're roasting, it's not just boom, coffee. It's something more unique. It starts out as a hard green bean that will break your teeth if you try to eat it, and then evolves into this. I'm going to pass them around so you can handle them. Yeah, feel free to toy around with them. But yeah, I had never really thought of it this way before. And I'd never really thought of, this is a flavor wheel, which it can tell you the type of grind and how the type of grind could affect the taste, or the soil that it came from, how it could affect the taste. It's really complex. And with this, keeping this in mind, being with the roaster while roasting, and you get to smell it, it's a metamorphosis that you would not imagine. It smells at the beginning sort of like, if some of you have smelled the green beans, it smells sort of like hay and grassy. Then it progresses into something more nutty. Then it's caramel, then chocolate, then it's coffee. It's not just coffee. It's something more complex. So this rod gives you an opportunity to see some of the process There's 25 pounds of coffee going in here at once. So to be able to pull out 2 tablespoons and see the progress somewhat and smell it is really something significant and something that impacted my thinking. This led me to continue to do my favorite part of this project, which was home roasting. The beans that you're actually seeing were roasted by me last night, and they're a medium roast Cerrado and from Brazil. And yeah, I gotta say, this gave me an even more detailed perspective of the nuances of coffee, because not only in order to do it on a cast iron skillet, you need to be stirring consistently, or else it's gonna be inconsistent. And you get to not only smell, but you get to see it with a small quantity. You get to see how it turns into from that green bean, and you hear the crackles and pops of the husks breaking. Then it's coffee. And it's something really, really complex in that regard. And yeah, I would say this is my favorite part of the project for sure. I was now at the point where I learned to make drinks. And during this project, I read a book by a guy called A.J. Jacobs. It's supposed to be at the library here, but I checked it out and haven't returned it yet. But yeah, you can, when it returns, read this book, highly recommend it. It's basically the story of a guy who goes around the world thanking everybody responsible for his morning coffee. Be it the roaster in New York City, or the farmer in rural Colombia, to the person who invented the Zarf, which is the cardboard cup holder thing on the coffee cup. Everybody, he gets all of them down. And he even met with the guy who made his morning lid. An American expat called Doug Fleming. And Doug said that coffee isn't farm to cup, it's farm to face. For my intensive purposes, I used it a little bit differently to allude to drinking coffee. And this is when I started working with Richard. A little bit backstory. Richard was my violin teacher for 7 years. And I also learned that he is a really awesome barista. So it was great to be able to work with him again and to learn. Well, he worked with me for 7 years on the fiddle. I figure I could ask 7 hours of his time to make coffee with me. And it was really a great opportunity, because I learned that coffee is so hard to make, espresso especially. It's insane. This is the dictionary definition of an espresso, which is coffee made by forcing steam through crushed beans, according to the Cambridge English Dictionary. It's not that easy. It's really hard. And I learned this with Richard. This is a latte that I eventually learned to make, but it took hours to get there, because you need to have a solid foundation, and with that, you need to be able to make a good espresso. And with that, I learned about the 4 M's. According to the Coffee Research Institute and Richard, they talk about the macchinazione, which is the correct grinding of a coffee blend. If it is ground differently, it can taste very different. To give an example, this on the right here is too fine. This is going to be the most watery and sour and horrible coffee ever. As opposed to this, it clumps more. So it will add some resistance to the water, and it'll make for a better espresso. So the grind is very important. And I learned about the miscela. So the bean and the blend of the coffee is very important. It must be roasted right. The macchina, the machine. Sorry to break the news, but that Cuisinart machine is not going to make a great coffee. You've got to have something that can get to the right temperature, and that can handle right, and that can push with a certain amount. Even the thing that holds the espresso, if it's not a certain way, it will affect the flow, and therefore we'll have problems. And then you need a good hand. You need to be able to do all of this very well and easily. So I learned that coffee is really complex, and not just making the drink, but the story of coffee is really complex. I mean, excuse me a sec. I learned that coffee is something that has been the economic backbone. Thank you. Economic backbone for countries. Like Brazil and Guatemala were founded off an economy that was exclusively coffee, and this led to the development of technologies coffee-centered. But it's also, unfortunately, is an industry of much, thank you, exploitation. I also learned to see coffee through other people's eyes. And I don't see this as just a 5-minute to make drink. This is a years in the making process. That little 2-inch sprig would take 3 years before it could be able to make fruit. And then it takes months of processing. Then it's going to be shipped. Then it's going to be roasted. Then it's going to sit on a shelf till somebody buys it. Then it's going to be made into something. So I learned to see this through the eyes of craftspeople and artists. I also learned that it's not easy to make a good cup of coffee. As I mentioned with Richard, it's really hard, but it isn't going to stop me because I want to keep making coffee and roasting coffee. This is something I intend to do in the future. And my outlook changed dramatically from it just being a drink to something that is much more than just a seed in a drink. Before I finish, I'd like to extend my thank yous to Miss Lehman for her help with the project and helping me come up with a essential question and sort of centering me on something, because I could go any direction with this project. It's massive, the magnitude of this. And I'd like to thank Cristobal, Matias, and Richard in spirit for helping me with their project and teaching me with this project and teaching me their craft. I'd like to thank MDI-HS for this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the fund for financial support. I'd like to thank Dan the Man for introducing me to Matias and allowing me to embark on a life-changing experience. I'd like to thank, I'm going to edit this by saying my family for their support, for helping me with this project. And a special thanks to my mother for coming with me to Costa Rica and coming on this journey. And I'd also like to thank my coffee test dummies for their feedback on my coffee roast and for drinking my coffee. Here are my sources. I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we'll open it up to you guys.
So you were mentioning how the average coffee bean has 10% HCP, CB, or
SHB.
Oh, SHB.
Yep.
So what is that? What is SHB?
SHB is just a classification of the bean. Yeah, they typically, when you go higher and higher altitudes, the beans start to go smaller and smaller and harder. However, that also means the higher you go, like a 3,000 meter coffee is not going to have as much flavor. An SHB, I suppose, is a hard bean that is small and maintains flavor.
So is more SHB more flavor? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
Like Matias's coffee is insanely flavorful, and SHB in this case, because it's Costa Rican, I was going to mention how I learned that the Brazilian coffee is more rounded because of the lower altitude. It's more chocolatey as opposed to the Costa Rican. Costa Rican is like more acidic. I sound like a nerd. But yeah, it is a classification of the type of bean.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sure thing, man. Yes, sir.
Did you encounter the technique of double roasting?
I did not.
Do you know what that is?
I've heard of it, but I have not personally worked with it. That is one of the things, along with the honey process, that I'd like to explore more into.
Because I read a book about a Dutch immigrant named Alfred Peet.
Yep.
Peet's Coffee.
Yeah.
He introduced the guys who founded Starbucks to really high quality coffee.
Well, I suppose
Supposedly the introduction that he brought was this double roasting technique.
I could see that because, especially, he's Dutch, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so the Dutch actually, in the colonial era, had one of the biggest coffee operations in the world, in the Dutch East Indies, which is now Indonesia. And Batavia, for example, Java, the island. And on that side of the world is a coffee called Robusta. There's the two major varietals, is Arabica and Robusta. And Robusta is known for being insanely bitter. So maybe this was to get different flavors out. That's the best I have for that one. Thank you for your question. Yes?
I know that in Costa Rica there's LaCasse has one way of making a cup of coffee.
Brew Bag.
What is it?
It's a brew bag?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I wondered what you thought of that method compared to what, we're more familiar with here, and if there's one, just the basic cup of coffee and not the latte, macchiato, etc. range.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favored technique?
I'll start with the brew bag. A brew bag is something, it's sort of like a pour over. So not really something that is conducive to espresso making because it's a looser type of thing. However, I prefer espresso, like the espresso machine, and I prefer a small but hard, small but big, if you will, approach to coffee. Favorite drink's a cortado, so that would be 1 part milk, 1 part coffee. And smaller and more compact is something I think is for me.
So what will you go forth in the world with if you don't have a huge, expensive espresso machine?
Bialetti machine, actually. The Bialetti machine. It's called a Mocha. It's invented by an Italian guy called also Alfred, I think, Bialetti. It's really just a percolator, but it makes a really good coffee and really is the best option for home coffee. My 2 cents and the 2 cents of many other people as well. Right.
Anything else? Panelists, do you have any questions? Or comments?
Yes.
So I was wondering if you can trace the origin of your passion for coffee.
Big. I haven't thought about this, but I suppose I started drinking coffee a long time ago. It used to start with just like an espresso with a hot cocoa, and something like that. But it evolved into something like I started getting really picky about my coffee, and like I'm picky to the point that there's some I will just call drink because it is not coffee. I think it was a gradual evolution, and I thought, hey, this would be fun to try out. I think my idea for this project evolved from a early interest at a point I cannot trace back. But I've been drinking coffee for a long time. Right. Yeah. Any more questions?
When you say that you are thinking about having this be in your future, are you going to college, or are you straight into just?
I'm actually moving to Newfoundland later this year to commence my studies at Memorial University of Newfoundland. I would be ready to work at a cafe. Actually, there's 2 on the campus, 1 in the gym. Unfortunately, both of which are called Tim Hortons. But I would be ready to entertain the idea of working for coffee. And even if I could do it on the side of my studies, and on the side of I'm a musician by trade as well, so I could do it on the side of that as well.
But are you when you say you can see it in your future, did you mean the roasting? Like you really are thinking that maybe you want to be a roaster and
Yeah, I'd like
that path as well as all the other things that you.
I'd like to continue roasting on an industrial level. I do not know, but for sure on the micro instead of the macro.
I don't expect you to know at 18 exactly, but I was just interested in whether if that was like your true path that you were feeling down to.
All right. Thank you.
So what we'll do now is ask the members of the audience to step outside and thank you for attending. I do want to say one quick thing.